Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I'm Steve Doyle and I'm your host. Well, we're not going to take a lot of time in the introductions here because I know our conversation today in this episode is going to run us right up to the time limit because there's so much to talk about. We are visiting today with two Sherlockians who I'm sure you are already familiar with. That is Scott Monty and Bert Walder from the Sherlockian podcast, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. This groundbreaking podcast sort of paved the way for all other Sherlockian podcasts. And so we are very excited to speak to them today about their efforts in this realm and, of course, about them as well. So without any further ado, Scott and Bert, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you guys here today. This is so great. Podcast to podcast. It's wonderful. And I just want to say how happy I am to see you guys.
And how happy we are to see you.
I know this has been a long time coming. We were big champions of Fortnightly Dispatch from the very beginning.
I will acknowledge that you guys were the first. How many episodes have you guys done?
We are about to record our 223rd episode. And
223 episodes.
We should add to that we are also on our, I want to make sure I get this right, 243rd episode of Trifles, our weekly podcast that we started 5 years ago.
I don't know how you guys have time to do two, but
it's all Bert, really.
Bert.
He's a time traveler.
That's it. Yeah. It's those long hours I spend making notes, writing the scripts, doing the rehearsal.
Yeah. Wow. You guys do a lot of prep. I don't.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. An enormous amount of prep. Before each episode of Trifles, I read the canon twice just to make sure I've got everything in my mind so that we can seamlessly shift from topic to topic.
Wow.
And Bert is seemingly shiftless as well. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's so great. I really do love your podcast. I know I have been on it a few times.
You think you have been on
when you're desperate, you call me up. But no, seriously, all kidding aside, I think I Hear Sherlock Everywhere is it always strikes me at how it's sort of like the NPR radio show for Sherlockians. That's how it comes across, and that's a real compliment because it's a very professional production, and I just think it's wonderful, and so hats off to you guys. I really
thank you.
I think it's quite amazing.
It's funny because over the years we've shifted formats a little bit. We'd do an interview here and there, and then we'd have a discussion here and there, and it got a little disjointed because there would be some times of the year before we got on this cadence of the 15th and the 30th of every month. That was something that evolved over time. The whole show has evolved over time, but it was concepted as Sherlockian Talk Radio. And initially, when we were kind of going back and forth, it was unsettling because people didn't know what to expect each time they tuned in. And at the time, we billed it as a cross between NPR's Fresh Air and Car Talk for Sherlockians.
That's a really interesting description because that's exactly how it strikes me and always has. And I think it's a winning formula. It's easy. It's easy for people to do. Well, I don't think it's easy. I think it takes some degree of ability to do a podcast. There are a lot. There's a number of Sherlockian podcasts, and I'm not casting any shade on anybody's podcast out there. I'm just saying it's easy to do them, but it takes a little more skill to do them really at a high level. And I think they're all fun. They're all great to listen to. But you guys were there first, and I just think that you have a good formula.
Well, thank you. We're also very introspective. We do spend a lot of time asking ourselves, how can we make the content better? How can we adapt the format? How can we make it more engaging? And the listener comments that we get are really very helpful.
They are, and we've had, of course, Wessex Press and the Baker Street Journal as longtime sponsors of the show, to the point now where I don't think people can think of our show without thinking of our sponsors. It's like Petri wine with the old Basil Rathbone shows. They're just inextricably linked.
I
And
love the fact that Wessex Press may be the Petri wine of Sherlockian publishing.
could be worse. It could be worse. But we've also integrated Patreon as a way for people to kind of pay their own way if they want. It's completely voluntary, and in doing so, we've opened up different rewards. We just had a discussion. We put it out to our supporters. Well, what would you like us to do in terms of recognition? So it's completely an ongoing, evolving entity that we both take very seriously in terms of the quality. We've invested in equipment. We put a lot into editing and post-production. And we both come at this from being professional communicators, and social media and podcasting and a number of different new media have sprung out of the communications field. And we kind of take that seriously as a study, as professionals, as well as just amateur Sherlockians as well.
Right. I completely sympathize with that. I'm a professional communicator in my non-Sherlockian life. And I do think bringing some of that to this helps. I do think it's again, I'm not even some podcasts by Sherlockians who are more enthusiasts than communication professionals can be quite entertaining. So please keep doing it. But I really do enjoy. I hear Sherlock everywhere, quite a lot, and so I'll confess it was an inspiration when we were beginning to fire up Fortnightly Dispatch. Of course, we're completely different. We have a different focus, and I think Ross Davies has characterized us as a TV show and you're a radio show, but nonetheless, here we all are, right?
That's exactly. And look, if anybody was going to do video production for the Sherlockian world, it would be you, clearly.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, first of all, nobody can beat your rates, Steve. So
yeah, which are free.
yeah. Great.
But we kind of have a convention here. It's so easy to just sort of assume that everybody knows who you guys are, and I'm sure they do. But let's just kind of fall back. I want to start with, just sort of familiarizing our viewers with our guest here today. So, who wants to go first?
Bert does.
Bert. Bert. So,
yes,
Bert,
that's me.
Where are you coming to us from today?
I'm coming to you from the beautiful hamlet of Scotch Plains, New Jersey, about 25 miles due west of Manhattan on the eastern seaboard of the continental United States, a little hamlet set and settled in the early 19th century by happy, simple, actually it was probably settled in the late 18th century, by unhappy, unsettled pilgrims from Scotland. But Scotch Plains, New Jersey, where my office is up at the top of the house. And here I am.
Great. So, Scott, where are you coming to us from today?
Well, after Bert with Scotch Plains, I feel like I should come from like Bourbon Falls or something like that. But I'm hailing most recently from Canton, Michigan. I moved out here in 2008 after having lived in Boston for about 20 years and having grown up in New England. Was offered a job by Ford to head up social media for the company globally. Moved the whole family out here, lock, stock, and barrel, and stayed on after I left Ford. So Bert and I have done very, very few episodes when we've been in the same room together. This has been an example that we've set for 15 years for remote working.
Right.
I mean, isn't it amazing, the technology that allows us to do that kind of thing? I mean, when you listen to your show, it's like it's as if you're in the same room, sitting across the table from each other. But the technology um, is quite wonderful, and it brings us. I mean, I think nothing has demonstrated the beauty of the technology like this pandemic that we've been living through, to be able to bring people together when they can't physically come together. But your show has been doing it even before that, and I think that's an amazing thing.
Yeah, and really over the last 18 months, we've seen so many Scion meetings, so many special gatherings, even the BSI weekend happening over Zoom, whether it's being done in production, whether it's being done live. I mean, everybody's experimenting with it, and it's wonderful. I was just at the 75th anniversary luncheon for the Amateur Mendicant Society over the weekend.
Now
And I ran
they're in Detroit, right? Is that
in
right?
Detroit. That's right. And I ran into one of our longtime faithful listeners, a guy by the name of Rich Kriskunas, who is from Detroit. And Rich, over the past 18 months, has attended over 250 Sherlockian meetings via Zoom. Think about that. He would
That's
not have
right.
physically been able to do that in the old times, right?
No, who
Back
could
when-
have, right? Yeah.
Right. And I asked him because I said that's fascinating. You must have seen so many different things. And I said, talk to me about the different styles of meetings that you've witnessed and what works for you, like what resonated for you, and how people do things differently. And he called out a couple of different scions and had an admiration for them. But I think this is just the opportunity for us to kind of compare notes, see what works for some people, what might
Right.
not work for others, and for us to constantly evolve and innovate.
I'm hoping that, post-pandemic, we continue this. I've been a member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London probably for 25 years, if not that close to it. But I've been to maybe 2-3 meetings over all of that time. But now to join all of the meetings, the AGM, to listen to all the conversation, to join the Red Circle, to join the Scintillation, to join, we really do need to find a way to continue to make the technology easy and simple enough so that we don't lose the distant audiences. It's wonderful.
Well, I completely agree. I mean, in my local science society, we have sort of pioneered the hybrid live meeting. We're meeting live, Dockwood, that continues, and yet we have an online component where distant members, because we do have members of the illustrious clients from around the country and even internationally, who we didn't want to lose them once we went back to meeting live. So we have a big screen with a projector, and they're live. They're in the room with us, participating in everything that happens, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. And so you're right. I agree with you, Bert. We don't want to lose that, right? I mean, it's
Right.
been it's been a kind of a universe expanding experience, I think, in some ways for our community.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you guys, Scott, how did you fall under the spell of Sherlock Holmes?
Oh gosh, it was decades ago when I was just a teenager. I decided I wanted to do my English high school research paper. I think it must have been sophomore year with my teacher, Mrs. Roy. I wanted to do a paper on Conan Doyle. And I went to the school library. There weren't too many resources there. A couple of Sherlock Holmes books. That's standard fare.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the town library, and we lived in a town of about 10,000 people. So it was not a huge library. But we had a few volumes there. The Man Who Was Sherlock Holmes, the John Dixon Carr biography. But there were, again, I was looking for more information. So I came into class the next day and I said, Mrs. Roy, I don't think I'm going to be able to complete this assignment. There aren't enough resources locally for me to do this. And she said, well, you know what? I saw this program last night on Evening Magazine. There's a guy right here in Connecticut who runs his own Sherlock Holmes club. Why don't you call up Channel 3 and get his number and then call him up and interview him as a primary source? Well, journalism 101, right? I called Channel 3. They gave me the name of one Harold E. Niver of Rocky Hill, Connecticut. And I called up his number, and he answered the phone, Baskerville Hall, and the hounds were baying in the background. And I introduced myself and told him why I was calling.
He didn't know you were calling.
He did not know. He had
It's just
just
the way
come in.
he answered the phone.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the amazing. They always answer. Tyke and Teddy always answer the phone. Baskerville Hall, and he had just come in from work. He was a piano salesman. Came in from the Steinway store, just kind of peeled off his coat and was sitting down. And do you know, Tyke spent an hour on the phone with me that night, talking to me about the history of the character and everything we know certainly about the popular culture
Right.
and evolution. And at the end of the call, he said, by the way, we do these meetings every fall and spring at Gillette Castle. Why don't you come to our next meeting? So, all right. So I had my dad drive me to down to Gillette Castle. I had my first Sherlock Holmes meeting, first Sherlock Holmes Society meeting in Gillette Castle. And it's been downhill ever since.
That's pretty. Okay, that's a good story. That is pretty amazing. That is amazing.
But I'll tell you, I walked in and I met the likes of Al Rosenblatt and some of the other legendary names we knew at the time. I think Tom Baker actually may have come to speak at the event that time. And I
mean like Doctor Who, Tom Baker?
Yeah. And I didn't know Doctor Who then. I heard, Tom Baker, he played Sherlock Holmes on the BBC for a television show. All right, whatever.
Right, yeah.
Right. First time. All right. But the thing is, at that meeting, in this wonderful surrounding, everybody made me feel like I had found my place, like I was right at home. And it was school teachers and artists and businessmen and musicians and you name it. Everything, as Bert likes to say, from plumbers to presidents. And we all just felt like we belonged together. And it's been that way ever since.
I think that's, this has been a recurring theme of conversation on the Fortnightly Dispatch, is that inclusiveness that our Sherlockian community has. And I think it's quite an amazing thing. That seems to be sort of a universal experience with people. Well, how about you, Bert? What how did you get entangled in the Sherlockian universe?
Well, I had read the stories in the 5th grade, if not earlier, and was a huge fan. And when the Baring Gould annotated came out, I was the kind of kid who read through the Hardy Boys and read through Tom Swift and read everything. And I read through all of Ellery Queen. I read through. And when the Baring Gould annotated came out, I was a member I used to join every book club. So I was a member of the Mystery Guild, the science fiction, and would read Ellery Queen's mystery magazine. And then the Baring Gould annotated came out. Wow. So I got a copy of that. And there I read about the existence of the Baker Street Irregulars. And Julian was mentioned there. So I wrote Julian a note. I looked in the phone book and found his address.
Because you could do that thing.
You could do that then without an internet. Oh, look at that. And I wrote him a note, and he connected me to Steve Clarkson, who then had sort of he was sort of the ombudsman for the younger group in those days. And he connected me to Andy Page. And so I joined the Priory School, which was Andy's society. And, we put out a newsletter and did things. And then I went to my first BSI dinner with Steve and with Andy, when I was probably 19 or 20 or 21, something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And at one of those meetings, if not that one, I met Al Silverstein in the lobby of the Algonquin because, we were just having wonderful social time after the BSI dinner, let's say. And Al invited me up to the Cornish Horrors. And then my girlfriend at the time and I went up and spent a weekend with Al and Myrna. And that actually became my first scion. And from there, I met Tyke and Teddy and got engaged with the men on the tour. And there you are. The rest is history.
I love that story. I mean, isn't it amazing how I'm continually gobsmacked by the fact that this hobby of ours will put you in touch with people who you would never imagine that you would ever encounter ever in your life.
Right.
I know. I had no inkling I'd be doing a podcast with Burt Wolder when I was all of
Right? I'm sitting here agog.
Well, too, there's no excuse for idiocy, though. I mean, in those days, my girlfriend at the time was a receptionist or something at a dental clinic in Manhattan. And it was the same dental clinic where Charles Hans and his wife were patients. And so she was also a Sherlockian enthusiast. And she said, oh boy, my boyfriend and I love Sherlock Holmes. So we were invited to visit Charles Hans and his wife in their flat in New York.
in place.
In Sutton Place. And I had absolutely no clue as to who he was. I mean, we had a lovely time. I put on a blazer. We went, they had tea, they had sandwiches, they had a lovely apartment. But I did, in those days, you couldn't Google and find out who Charles Hans was.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Charles Hans, he was the deputy general manager of the Associated Press.
I
I know who he is. Yeah,
I think I knew enough to know that he was some kind of a journalist.
He was like a real guy.
Yeah. And we had a lovely time, and he was very sharing and articulate about his enthusiasms. But now I kick myself for spending some time with somebody like that who was such a name in the Sherlockian community and being basically a dope.
Well, and I'm kicking you, Bert, because I'm collecting Hansian.
Right.
So, missed opportunity to grab a couple things off his shelf.
He did give me things off his shelf. He had material from prior BSI dinners that he didn't want. And so he, said, take this. I don't need that. Take this. And somewhere I have it, but I think it's, it's little pamphlets. It's nothing. It's not like, a signed copy of anything.
That is something, Bert.
Yes, it is something. If I could find
something.
it. Yeah.
It's like my first BSI dinner, since we're just, talking about this kind of thing. I had there's a long story. Someday in my Sherlockian memoirs, I'll write the account of my, the ordeal I went through to get to New York in a blizzard to get to that dinner, and I made it. And I get in there and I sit down. The dinner had just started like 15 minutes earlier. I get there, I sit down, and this nice elderly gentleman next to me says, "Hello, nice that you can make it. I was, we were all worried about you." And I said, "Oh, well, thank you very much." He said, "Hi, well, you're Stephen Doyle, right?" I said, "Yeah." And I was like, whatever. And he goes, "I'm Paul Anderson. Nice to meet you." I'm like, "Nice to meet you too." And I turn away. I'm like, "What?" Wait a minute. As if I wasn't completely freaked out already.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a wonderful thing. It really truly is. I just, I find that this community that we're in and the opportunities for connecting to people that that you have are just amazing to me.
Yes. Well, and they're all so welcoming. I mean, I remember one of my early BSI dinners, maybe it was the first one. I said to myself, my God, I am meeting people whose names I've only previously seen on the spines of books on my shelf.
Yes,
so I met
exactly.
Howard Haycraft. Howard Haycraft? I had, Murder, his books and that he'd edited. And I said, my God, and then Isaac Asimov. And
right. Yes, exactly.
And it's also welcoming and very gracious.
Yeah, it's quite an opportunity. And and it's not just famous people, right? It's
Right.
How many times have you all been in a Science Society meeting or at a weekend conference or in New York at some, one of the many events that go on there, and you've encountered somebody, right, who is just, I'm going to know this person for the rest of my life,
For better or worse.
For better or worse. For better or worse. But it happens so often, and it's such a blessing.
Steve, before we get too far from the subject, I have my Heritage Press edition, one of my Heritage Press editions of the canon here. You know how we are.
The reader copy. You
A reader copy. Well, this one isn't really I double shelve on some of my my shelves here, so I had to dig for this one. But it was worth digging for because...
Wait a minute here. Let me take a look here.
A Heritage for Paul Anderson, signed by Edgar W. Smith, 1959.
All right, Scott, you've done it. The green wave of jealousy is rising in me. That is absolutely wonderful. That is really good.
Well, it's, the wonder of association copies, and by virtue of knowing the people that we know, the people that we still talk about, these relationships that we forge, that we may know for the rest of our lives. And I met Paul a couple of times, and of course Karen. You never know what it's going to bring you in touch with, and by virtue of having those relationships, knowing those names, when you do happen to be in a bookstore, or to get an alert on eBay, or wherever you get your alerts from. When I saw something like that, I'm like, I cannot let this get away from me, right? And to the uninitiated, like, they may not know, Sherlockians may not know who Paul Anderson is. Science fiction people may not know who Edgar Smith is. But for those of us that are at the nexus, my gosh.
Right, at the intersection of those two worlds.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that. I happen to have Isaac Asimov's bar bill. And when I signed for it, he said to me, you'll thank me later.
Hey, guys, I'm sure you can sympathize with this. We need to take a commercial break and hear from our sponsor.
You should subscribe to the Baker Street Journal because it is the place to learn about what's going on in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
The Baker Street Journal is hands down my favorite Sherlockian thing to read. When it comes in the mail, my night is planned.
The Baker Street Journal is the place to play the game. If you're a Sherlockian, you want to be able to do the game of understanding the times of Sherlock Holmes, the stories of Sherlock Holmes, what Sherlock Holmes is all about.
If you are not a subscriber to the Baker Street Journal, you have no idea what you're missing out. This is hands down the best writing about the writings you'll ever find.
You'll find great articles about new discoveries that are being made every single day. But beyond that, you'll find out what other people are doing and how you can become more involved in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, we're back. Well, I do want to talk to you about a little more detail about your podcast. So I'm just going to play ignorant here. I know a lot about it, but when did it start? Well, first of all, how did you start it? How did you get the idea to do this?
So the site I hear of Sherlock.com actually began as the Baker Street blog. There was a separate website for the podcast that came along later. Eventually, we merged the two, just for simplicity's sake. But it started as the Baker Street blog because I was the business manager for the Baker Street Journal. I was invested in the BSI in 2001. I think I sent a 10-point plan to Mike Whalen about some strategic ideas for the way to evolve the journal. This was back when the BSJ CD-ROM was first a thing. And I said, look, if we're selling a CD-ROM, that means people have computers. Computers are connected to the internet. We should be selling this on the internet. So let's put a website together for the Baker Street Journal. So we did that. And of course, the BSJ comes out quarterly. But at the speed of the internet, things are happening so much more frequently. And I wanted a way to kind of capture some of that. It wasn't meant to be a site for scholarship. It was meant to be a site at the intersection of Sherlock Holmes and popular culture. Mm-hmm. And that's how the Baker Street blog started. A couple of years into that, started that in 2005. A couple of years in 2007, early 2007, Bert and I began to talk. And we were talking because we had been part of the same science societies up in New England for many, many years. And we knew both of ourselves to be adept in marketing and communications. And I knew podcasting was suddenly a thing. I thought, well, Sherlockians have always listened to radio. Basil Rathbone and Petri Wine, as we mentioned before, it would seem natural to do a show using this new medium. So I said to Bert, what would you think about starting a podcast? I think it's a great idea. I don't think either one of us thought we could do it alone. It's a tough going to do it alone. And we began to develop the idea for the show, the concept for the show, back and forth. And that's been the wonder, for me at least, in this relationship, is how the two of us play off of each other's strengths or weaknesses, as the case may be. You can tell we both have fun doing this. We have great senses of humor about it. But we also have ideas. Now, some of our ideas may not meet exactly, but it's the power of discussion and evolving this. And I think we launched in June of 2007 with our very first episode. And it was just kind of an introduction to podcasts. Like, here's what you need to know if you're going to subscribe to a podcast. Very basic stuff and boring stuff, quite frankly. But we got into, look at episode 2 we did with West Express with you and Mark. Steve, you were our
We
second
do?
episode.
Wait, number 2? Oh, my
You
goodness.
were our very first interview. And that launched the format for the show to come.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know we were that early in the game. I knew we were early, but I didn't know we were that early.
And I was always a fan of old time radio, even though it all happened before I was born, really. And in fact, for a time, I was the head of PR for AT&T Labs. And we developed a series of, the company had made a big bet on broadband. And we developed a series of prototype devices that would demonstrate what the broadband future looked like, ski goggles with cameras built in and so on. And one of them was an MP3 player. We had experts in in music compression and compression formats and so on. And so I actually had one of the early experimental MP3 players. And audio recording had always been a hobby of mine, cassettes, reel to reel. So the idea of doing a podcast, that was great.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen Bert with his field gear, where he's got his recorder and his leather pouch and his microphone, he's the man on the street.
Yeah.
This just epitomizes the old style.
Yeah, press pass in my fedora.
Like tucked in your, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, really.
My speed
because,
graphic.
like I said, I think you guys sort of paved the way for all of us. No doubt about it. And so, I'm just
Really, the more the merrier, as far as we're concerned.
Yeah.
People should have options. I think there's different things that work for everyone. And we're honored that other people have followed in our footsteps and even surpassed us in some cases.
Well, I just want to say, like I said, I think your format, your kind of car talk, NPR kind of format that you outlined earlier is unique. And so hats off to that. It's great. And
Just don't drive like my brother.
Don't drive like my brother. Don't drive like my Sherlockian.
so let me ask you this. So you've 200 plus episodes, well over 200 episodes. So what do you have any episodes that really stand out to you?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I will say, to Bert's great credit, early on in the show, this would have been season 4, I think, and I know the episode number, episode 26. It was a musical stroll down Baker Street. Now, Bert was a member of the Players, and for those who have attended Sherlockian gatherings in around the Baker Street Irregulars weekend, the Players, which people will constantly refer to as the Players Club. But a fellow member of the Players, and these are people that are interested in theater or associated with the theater in one way or another. A fellow member of the Players was none other than Fritz Weaver, who played Sherlock Holmes on Broadway in Baker Street, the musical, in 1965. Bert contacted Fritz Weaver and asked him if he would be a guest on our show. And to everyone's surprise, he said yes.
Sure.
And he had to be one of the most charming guests that we had. Bert played some audio clips for him. It was just a magical show. And the fact that we were able to pull it off so early in our evolution, I think, was a testament to where we were going to go.
Well, I agree. I mean, I just love that because, you know, I played the album over and over again, and I loved the show. And it was just a thrill to talk to Fritz about that. He was also in, was it Failsafe?
Yes.
Yeah, it was in Failsafe. And he had come to the players to give a few minutes of talk before a screening of Failsafe. And he played Colonel Cassio. And he had a lot of stories about that production and the part he really wanted to play and couldn't. And it was there that I asked him, you know, we're Sherlock Holmes fans and we'd love to talk to you. So that was great. The other one I remember is Lara Pulver. You know, it's not everybody who gets a chance to talk to Irene Adler, but she was so gracious. She was in the West End, I think, in a Chekhov play.
Yeah.
And she dialed in after, you know, she spends the evening giving a performance, and after the performance dials us up, you know, after she got back home when she's obviously exhausted, just to talk about being Irene Adler. And she was so much fun and so gracious. That's one of the ones that comes to mind for me too.
Yeah. I remember that one too. I remember both those. You know, that's really great.
Do you have a favorite episode, Steve?
Hard to choose.
Other than the one you've been on?
Well, I've been on a number of them, so it's hard to it's hard to choose. I think though, you know, I mean, of course I remember the ones I've been in. I think one of the ones that personally, I can speak to those really well. I mean, I remember the episode that I was in with David Stewart Davies.
Yes.
Following the death of Edward Hardwick. That really was a sad moment for us in the Sherlockian community, and both David and I had established friendships with him, and so it was really a nice time to come. You know, it was nice to be able to sort of come together and reminisce about our memories of him. He, you know, as you guys remember, I'm sure, you know, he came to our very first Gillette to Brett conference here in Indianapolis. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, you know, he came to Indianapolis, and he and so he was, you know, I mean, we became friends, you know, and over the years, you know, we stayed in touch. We exchanged Christmas cards. We, you know, corresponded. And then when he had passed, it was, you know, it was a sad moment. But, you know, so it was fun to be, it was a great opportunity to be on your show with David to remember him. That's what I remember particularly.
Well, also, I remember the one we did after the last Gillette to Brett, where we had the opportunity to do these snippets, just so the people who couldn't be there could understand what some of the content was. And that was really nice, I thought, to extend that experience, that Gillette to Brett experience, to a wider audience.
Yeah. And, you know, I think anytime we can bring people into a world that they otherwise wouldn't have had access to, just like the pandemic has done for people over the last year. It opens up, just as so many of us have had a world opened up to us, whether we sit next to someone at a dinner, whether we show up at a Science Society meeting, or call someone up whose name or address we find at the back of a book in a library. We are exposed to so much more than we would have been. And for us, these remembrance episodes, we just had an episode, 216, remembering the contributions of John Lellenberg to our hobby. John was a controversial figure, but he was also a very learned figure, someone who did so much to keep alive the memories of particularly this hobby in the BSI. And Susan Rice died a year ago. We put together a written remembrance of her from a number of people that contributed from all across the world. It's by telling these stories to each other over and over again, capturing them either in electrons or in MP3s, and making them available to a wider group of people, and hopefully instilling them for history. For those who want to find this stuff in the BSI archives in someday, that these stories will continue to live on.
That's interesting to me that you say that, because one of the goals of this show has been to introduce people. We've had so many over the last, say, 10 years. So many new Sherlockians come into the hobby, and for those of us who've been around a long time, we take it for granted that, well, you just know who these people are, right? You know who what this book is about, or that group, or this person, what their significance. But to take that for granted is a mistake, because I think there's been sort of I don't know how to put it, sort of a poor catechesis when it comes to our Sherlockian history. And so one of the goals of this show has been to sort of provide it as an opportunity to introduce people, to these to individuals or events or books or things that they might be interested in knowing about, to expand the enjoyment of their experience in the hobby. And so to hear you say that, I think is really interesting, because sometimes you're kind of playing for history.
Yeah, but that's so fundamental to Sherlockians, because after all, Christopher Morley, who founded the Baker Street Irregulars, was one of these people. He was like a searchlight. You would read Morley's essays, and you would find the people that were interesting to him. You'd find, that's how I found C.E. Montague. He would write about Stevenson. He would write about David Grayson. And so it's the sharing of your enthusiasms. It's finding another voice that says, hey, I bet you're going to like this.
Right.
That's really sort of very, very, very fundamental to Sherlockians.
And I think the thing that unites all of us is the people that we like to attract, the people that we tend to attract, are people that will follow up on those cues, people that will go down a rabbit hole, people that will search for that book or that author or some additional history. And I think, Steve, what you're talking about here is, well, perhaps in some ways making it a little easier for them, since so much information is out there and it's so dispersed now. There's no one place they can go for all of the information, even though there are some very great resources on the internet, like Chris Redmond's old site that he turned over to Michigan State University.
And Brad Kefauver
and all the history, the chronologies, and of course now you've got the Universal Sherlock Holmes, which is electronic. You can get that through the University of Minnesota website. But there's so many different ways to go about this. It's nice to have a grounding and to have an introduction to say, okay, here's why these people are interesting, or find out from your own viewing and listening capabilities why they're interesting to you.
I agree. I think that's exactly right. I mean, that brings me to another question I had for you guys. I know that the feedback we get here at Fortnightly Dispatch is so generous, and so it's very it means a lot. It's very affirming. And I'm sure that you guys getting that too. I mean, how valuable is it, that connection you have with your audience?
Well, I'd say it's seminal. I mean, look, until recently, we didn't have the ability to get immediate interaction. I mean, podcasting has always, quote unquote, fallen under the guise of social media, but it's really not. So it's asynchronous, right?
Mm-hmm.
But recently we've seen through Zoom calls, through audio applications like Clubhouse, for example, that we're hearing a lot about, Twitter Spaces, Fireside. There are live shows that people are doing now. So having the ability to interact with your audience is even more important. For us, we've built in the commenting function. We've had a call-in number since our very early episodes. People don't use that as much as they do other methodologies. But we've even seen comments from people on ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. And some people are critical of what we do. And in some cases, it's fair criticism. And it helps us determine how we continue to evolve the show. They say, you talk for too long at the beginning. Just get to the point. Okay, we'll shorten up that banter at the beginning and we'll get right to it. Right. So that's helpful, even if it is critical. Because
it's valuable. I mean, it is. Because, it's pretty easy for us to be here in our space here, right?
Right.
We're kind of in our own little bubble. But, it's really about what the perception of the audience is, right? I mean, you want to make sure that you're kind of meeting that need.
Right. And this is kind of the criticism we got a little bit, Steve, early on with I hear of Sherlock everywhere, talking to other Sherlockians, talking to other BSIs. They say, well, this sounds like too much inside baseball for me. When are you going to talk about the stories? Right. So that's how Trifles was born. We thought, well, we can still interview people that are writing books and doing plays and, all the rest about Sherlock Holmes in popular culture. But why don't we take the time to do some of the things we do at Sherlockian science meetings, or some of the things that we've seen written over the years in these wonderful journals, and to pick apart some of the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories and talk about what they mean. Well, what is a Persian slipper? What's a coal scuttle? What's a gasogene, right? And kind of bring these things to life.
It's a very different animal than what you were doing, what you're doing in I hear Sherlock everywhere.
That's right.
So, yeah. So what you responded to a request for something else. I think that's really interesting.
And just to be clear, we're not a request show. We're not. We do. At Trifles, we do.
If we were responsive to requests, we would have stopped a long time ago.
Yeah, that's right. No, we're not doing the oldies, but we do ask people occasionally for, well, what ideas do you have? What questions do you want answered that we haven't already answered? What would you like to see us cover? And we take that as input for when we are planning and producing the show.
It's so interesting. I'll be ripping you guys off. I'm just saying.
Go ahead.
Keep doing it.
Go ahead.
Well, I find it, it's interesting to me that, we've kind of carved out our own space, I think, and, but, I just find that there's room for different kinds of things. And I think that's really, a testimony to, the depth and breadth of our hobby, that there's all kinds of space for this. I had no idea that people are doing live podcasting. I mean, I just am put in mind of, that great line from that wonderful movie, My Favorite Year. It's like, what? It's live. It just goes out and spills into people's living rooms. Just live. It's like, live? Are you kidding me? That's like walking out there without a net, Right. That's amazing to me.
Well, we wouldn't do live programming unless we were really comfortable with what we're doing. I think we experimented a little bit over the last couple of years. We're going to continue to do that. I think the technology has improved. The platforms have improved, and we're actually going to be announcing some things in the fourth quarter of 2021 to our best fans, our Patreon supporters, our PayPal supporters, of how they can actually take part in some of this stuff.
Very interesting. The You're primarily known as an audio podcast, sort of like you said, sort of a radio show. But you have done a couple of sort of video incarnations of it over the. How do you? How did you like that? How was that? How'd that go for you?
Bert?
Oh, I love video. I think for us, we only did a couple. I think the things that we've done live at a conference have been a little awkward because they really were completely unscripted. And so we had to spend a lot of time trying to vamp to avoid, dead air. But in terms of a video extension of I Hear Sherlock Everywhere, I think it's very easy, to do that. I mean, it's just turning on the camera. The problem is, keeping it interesting. Keeping it interesting for the viewer. It's not all that interesting to watch two people talking, basically.
Well, I think there's an opportunity here.
Yes.
We will continue to try video. We're not going to spend a lot of time on video because, again, not our strength, right? We are audio. But I have a whole soundboard over here. Let me see if I can show you the mess on my desk here.
Lovely.
There's my soundboard right there.
Bart Simpson too.
Yeah, that's a pencil holder there. A whole soundboard there where I can control sound effects and intro, outro, make it a lot more production friendly and professionally produced with literally just the press of a button. Right? If I wanted to go into, Bert, it's great to have you here tonight. Yeah. We can do that stuff on the fly now if we want to. And if we do it on audio, it doesn't distract people when they see me, kind of going over here on the side trying to figure out what the soundboard looks like. I can still talk and vamp and you won't know when I'm hitting the buttons. So I think we're going to be trying that, whether it's on Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse or Fireside Chat, and inviting people in to participate. And just had an exchange earlier this week with Bob Katz. He said, you could run like a Groucho Marx thing. You have a secret word. Right? If somebody says a secret word, they win, whatever, a year subscription to the Baker Street Journal or, your favorite book from Wessex Press. We could have a lot of fun with that. So I think we're going to continue to experiment.
I think, we'd love to experiment. It is a TikTok world, though. I mean, today, the attention spans are shorter. I think you do need to be thinking in terms of video, in terms of 30s and 45s, in terms of.
Oh, I know. It's a challenge. It is. Well, gentlemen, believe it or not, we're just about out of time. I know, I can't believe it. Right?
What? We've done it again.
I know. We've done it again.
It's always 1895.
I just want to say, we are really up against the clock. So I just want to say thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. I want to encourage everybody out there in the Fortnightly Dispatch viewing audience to, I'm sure you already are, but if you aren't, be sure to look up I Hear Sherlock Everywhere. It is the original Sherlockian podcast. Kind of paved the way for everybody here. And Scott and Bert, it's been a pleasure to have you guys. You're friends and fellow Sherlockians, and it's always a pleasure to have some time to visit, even virtually here in the podcast world with fellow Sherlockians. And I just want to thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And just let us know when you're ready for part 2.
We'll do. I mean, there's so much, right? There's so much to talk about that we didn't get to. All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Take care. And I look forward to seeing you both sooner than later.
You're here.
Absolutely.
And that's it for this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. Not only is that it for this episode, but it's also the end of this season of the Fortnightly Dispatch. We're going to be taking a break. We've done 13 episodes in season 2, and we will be returning. I know this sounds like a long time, but we will be returning in early January, shortly after the Baker Street Irregulars dinner in January. In the meantime, I hope you all take care I look forward to seeing you all back here in this space for another season of interviews and visits with Sherlockians about people and places and books and all the kind of things we love. Your feedback has meant more to us than I can say. And that's the honest truth. So be well, take care, and we'll see you when we come back.